It's Firearms Friday at the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne. I'm firearms historian Evan Green, and I've been doing a project at the request of the collections staff. We have in the collection about 20 artifacts, items, objects that were associated with Tom Horn. And you may, if you're familiar with Wyoming history, you probably know who Tom Horn was. You may have seen the movie that starred Steve McQueen, which was not very accurate, but again, chronicled the life of a guy, interesting guy, had an interesting life. He was born in Missouri in 1860. He left home as a teenager, did the standard stuff, drove a freight wagon, worked on the railroad, drove cattle, worked as a cowboy, may have come up with a cattle drive from Texas in 78 and 79 when he would have been 18 and 19 years old. In 1880, he was in the city directory for Cripple Creek, Colorado, as a prospector, prospecting around that area and Leadville. He eventually was hired to drive a mail hack between Santa Fe, New Mexico and Prescott, Arizona. Because he was familiar with that route, he was then hired to drive a herd of mules to the San Carlos Agency in Arizona. And he spent probably 1882 to 1886 there, initially as a herder and then as a packer. The troops, the cavalry, were supported not with wagons but with a mule train carrying ammunition and supplies. And he became quite proficient as a packer, and at some point his skills that he developed when he was growing up as a tracker came to the attention of the chief of the Apache Scouts, a guy named Al Cyber. And he recruited Horn to assist him in chasing renegade Apaches with Apaches. General George Crook was quite successful as an Indian fighter. He understood that the way you catch Apaches is to chase them with other Apaches. And he was quite successful at that and established the Apache Scouts. So Horn served there and was eventually, from 1885 to 1886, after Al Cyber had medical problems, he was chief of scouts and responsible for about 500 Apache scouts as they pursued renegade Apaches. When Geronimo finally was captured and surrendered in 1886, Horn was discharged from his duties there. He worked on a ranch for a while. He tried to start his own ranch. His stock got all stolen. In 1890, he was hired by the Pinkertons, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and he and other agents were fairly successful in tracking down train robbers and horse thieves. We think pretty well confirmed that he came to Wyoming in 1892, was hired by the Swan Land and Cattle Company. There's documentation that he was actually hired by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. His initial responsibilities were kind of ride through the country and look for missing or stolen cattle. And that segued into becoming an enforcer. He arrested a family that he caught butchering a stolen animal, a stolen steer, arrested him, took him to town, and they got off. And that sort of soured him on the criminal justice system. So he was quoted as saying, "I have a system that never fails. Killing men is my specialty, and I think I have a corner on the market." So lots of people, lots of alleged rustlers either left the country or ended up dead. And in July of 1901, a 14-year-old boy named Willie Nickel was killed after he got off his horse to open a gate to get off his parents' property and onto the public road. and he was shot. He was hit twice. Ran, staggered 20 yards back towards home, and expired. And there was no hard evidence, but Horn, given his reputation, was suspected. So at the time, there was a deputy U.S. Marshal in the area named Joe LaForce. And LaForce knew of Horn, knew about him, and under the guise of recruiting him for a stock detective job in Montana, had Horn come to his office on 16th Street here in Cheyenne. And in the course of their conversation, I think this would, in today's terminology, would be called leading the witness, LaForce induced Tom Horn to talk about the people he had killed, including Willie Nickel, the 14-year-old boy. And Horn was quoted as saying, "It was the best shot I ever made and the dirtiest trick I ever done." Whether he was establishing his credentials with LaForce to get that job in Montana, or whether he was guilty of that particular crime, is still debated today. There was a mock trial held in 1993 with people playing all the roles, actually had a federal judge as the judge and attorneys using the script, using the transcripts from the actual trial. And in that trial, Horn was found not guilty, which is not the same as being innocent, but that's another thing. So anyway, we wanted to look at these artifacts that are in the collection that are associated with Horn. And these are four that I have a fairly high level of confidence that they could be exhibited as, if not directly tied to Tom Horn, they could be labeled as the type of work that he did. And that's true of this hackamore and this remnant here. Now, this piece here is called in Anglo a macarte, and it is a corruption of the Spanish word macate, which is a braided or twisted rope used in lieu of reins on a young horse or a horse that fights the bit, because you can use this hackamore, still control the horse, and not have the bit in his mouth. And the workmanship on this is pretty rudimentary, but it's interesting to me. There's a picture that we'll post of Tom Horn with a rope that he braided while he was in jail in Laramie County here in Cheyenne. And the workmanship is similar. The rope has this same twisted, it's not braided, it's twisted, this same pattern of alternating black and white hair on there, and then the macarte itself is twisted also. And I needed to remind people, when Tom Horn made this stuff, and he made some of it while he was in jail, he made a lot of it when he was just traveling around the country. A couple of things that we have say that he did this work while he was laid up during a storm, and that leads to me a little bit more credence than that blanket statement, Tom Horn made this while he was in jail. So this is an example, I think, of the kind of work that he did. And he didn't set out to make stuff for exhibit in a museum. He set out to make stuff that could be used. He asked his friends to bring him horsehair while he was in jail and did the work. And the only really legitimate, authenticated horn braided or twisted rope is the one that's in that picture. And we don't know where it is. There are lots of people who claim they have it, but they don't have the provenance to prove it. But again, the technique used and the style on this hackamore and macarte are very similar to the work that Horn was doing while he was in jail. And again, a lot of the artifacts in not only our museum but others are all based on one statement or claim by the donor with no supporting documentation. Well, this little piece here, again, is that twisted, not braided, but twisted technique that Horn was using while he was in jail. And the thing that lends some credence to this is the specificity that the donor said. The donor stated this was made by Tom Horn in October of 1901 while he was laid up in a cabin below the ranch house because of a storm. That's more specificity than, this was made by Tom Horn while he was in jail or not. So the next one we're going to look at is this. This is a 15-foot, and this is a braided rope. This is not twisted, but it's still that same black and white alternating horsehair. This, when it's unwrapped, is 15 feet long, counting the tassels, and again is a nice piece of workmanship. Now, Larry Ball, who I recommend as the best and absolute critical resource for Tom Horn research. He's an excellent historian, so I recommend this particular book highly. And Ball reported that ranchers often had places in their bunkhouse or barn where Tom, while he was in their area, could work on his horsehair or rawhide braiding. So one of those ranchers was a rancher named William Clay, and he was at the far north end of the Iron Mountain area, almost directly west of the little town of Chugwater. And the people who hired Tom Horn had an arrangement with William Clay that when Horn was working in that northern area of the range, William Clay would provide room and board for Horn. So if he was staying there, it makes sense that he would have had a place to work. And this was allegedly made by Horn while he was at William Clay's ranch from William Clay's horse tails. They normally used tail hair for these ropes. And again, this is an artifact that was in the possession of a single family from the time that it was allegedly made until it was donated to the State Museum. William Clay's older sister, Nanny Clay Steele, was married to a Wyoming rancher and donated this rope to the museum in the 1930s, shortly after William Clay passed away. So I'm giving this one about 95%. I think this is a legitimate Horn artifact. And these, who would think that a range detective and serial killer would wear these shoes? But there's a picture of him. The picture of him with a rope shows him wearing low shoes of this type. And the story that goes with these is T. Blake Kennedy was the youngest member of Horn's defense team at the Willie Nickel trial. He was replaced, he eventually became a federal judge, and was replaced on that bench by Judge Kerr. And when Kerr was cleaning out Kennedy's office in order for him to move in, he found these shoes wrapped in a newspaper and asked Kennedy, what are these? Where did these come from? And he said, those are Tom Horn's shoes, and we were going to use them as an exhibit in the trial to prove that the tracks that were found at a couple of the murder scenes were smaller than Tom Horn's size. These are marked a 9 on the bottom. They're somewhat smaller than a modern size 9 shoe. And again, they're not very big, and they're worn through on the bottom. assuming that he wore these for the 22 months that he was incarcerated in the Laramie County Jail. So again, the story on these seemed to hold up because they were donated to the museum from the estate of T. Blake Kennedy. So I think those are pretty solid. So that's Tom Horn, and I think some artifacts that can legitimately, with proper interpretation, be exhibited and accredited to him. So again, there's several books out. Larry Ball's is the best. John Davis did one that's specifically on the trial. I probably get in trouble for saying this, but kind of the local recognized expert on Tom Horn is Chip Carlson. He wrote 2 books about Horn and 1 about Joe LaForge. But he based a lot of his information on Horn's autobiography, which has pretty much been discredited. So anyway, worth reading, and just be advised there's a lot of misinformation out there about Tom Horn and his career. Okay, thanks for watching.